Welcome back, everyone. Our next guest performs a much-needed service, which is especially pertinent to those whose experience of religious or spiritual groups involved predatory behavior by those in leadership. Carol Murchison is of counsel at McAllister Oliverius, where she heads up the Sexual Misconduct in Spiritual Communities Practice Group. She is based in New Jersey and is registered as an attorney with the Massachusetts Bar. Carol has worked with survivors of abuse and misconduct across a number of global spiritual and religious movements and has extensive experience as both a litigator and an investigator. It was my pleasure to interview her on the Divorcing Religion podcast. I do have a trigger warning here. Carol may be discussing sexual assault during this talk, so please practice self-care by stepping away from this session if you need to. Carol's session today is entitled Civil Law and Religious Accountability, Tools for Sexual Abuse Survivors in Cultic Spiritual Communities. Carol, I'm so glad you could join us for this important conversation today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Janice. I want to thank you for the work that you do, and a thank you to all of the folks who've been presenting and who are here today, because it's such important work that we need to do in this arena. So I'm delighted to be here to talk about my very little lane in this whole sphere, which is, as you said, Janice, civil law and religious accountability for sexual assault. So let me tell you a little bit about my background. As Janice told you, I'm a lawyer. I was a lawyer for a number of years who specialized in employment law and in representing companies in employment law. And in that work, I did a lot of investigations into issues of sexual misconduct in the workplace. Then I'd kind of reached the end of that. I retired, and at about the time that Harvey Weinstein gained prominence, I was asked to do a pro bono project in a Buddhist community in Canada. And I was asked to investigate allegations of sexual assault. And I have to say, so this was 2018, my first thought is, well, for goodness sakes, they're Buddhists. You know, they could not possibly be sexually assaulting people. Well, of course, that was a very naive view. I'm sure you can imagine, because in fact, they were sexually assaulting people. And when that particular project got a lot of press, and I had a lot of people then come to me and say, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that that was a thing, right? I didn't even know that this kind of thing was happening. We hear a lot in the United States about the Catholic Church, but we hadn't really come to have a reckoning, I think, on some of these other spiritual communities. So I began to have people asking me, will you do that same thing, which was just an investigation, and trying to get organizations to actually come to grips with this? And I did that for 4 years pro bono, and I could not get one single one of these organizations to actually accept responsibility for the things that were going on. And so I joined a law firm based in London, but which practices in the United States. And so now I have an entire practice group that is focused, as Janice said, on sexual assault in spiritual communities. So why sexual assault? Well, unfortunately, the kind of bad news of the law, and I think this holds for certainly for the United States and Canada, certainly for other Western countries, we do not have enough legal tools to bring accountability for the harm that is done in these kinds of, whether they are cults, whether they're high demand, whatever kind of spiritual and religious flavor that they have. We don't have the tools, for example, to deal with some of the things that you've been talking about at the conference, for toxic purity, for shunning, for a myriad of psychological, emotional, and financial abuse. But what we do have tools for is sexual assault. And that's because sexual assaults are recognized as crimes in all countries. More difficult in some countries to pursue those things as crimes, but certainly they are crimes in all countries. And so consequently, there are some tools available that we can use to be able to bring what I think of, I used to say justice, but I don't even know what that means in the context of religious cults, the kind of institutional betrayal, personal betrayal. And so I now think of it as accountability and justice, because I think that we need to begin through the law as necessary to hold these organizations and their leaders accountable for the harm that they do. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to invite you to chat in your questions as we go. So don't wait until the last 15 minutes. We're talking about legal issues. It's always difficult for me to assess whether, I'm kind of whether you have questions that I need to answer very early on. And so consequently, you will be doing me and everyone else a great favor. If you don't understand something, chat in the chat box. I understand that some of you are already anonymous. Know that when I read your question, I will not read your name, whatever it is. And so you will be anonymous there as well. So I thought that I would start with this question, what if? And that I would construct a kind of hypothetical scenario for you that would be like maybe a composite of some of the cases that I have. I currently have about, I would say, 35 plaintiffs. Some 2, sometimes 3 from different organizations, all of them in the United States and Canada. And so I just went through and I took out the kinds of common things that we see. And I said, what if? So what if Sally goes to do a month-long selfless service, or SIVA, I think it is called, a retreat at an ashram. It's in a warm climate. There's healthy food, loving people, lots of yoga, probably meditation. And Sally is going to, in this selfless service, work for the organization. And I mean, I would tell you that before 2018, that would all have sounded very good to me. But in 2023, I asked myself, what could go wrong? Because a lot of the clients that I have in my legal practice began this way, if not at an ashram, at a retreat, or something similar. And so as it happens, what I know is that a lot can go wrong. And so on the left-hand side, I've tried to list some of the things that happen to Sally when she goes to the ashram or to the retreat center. First of all, there is isolation from the outside world. And this happens in a great many of the lawsuits that I am handling. That is, that there isn't any there's a very hard barrier that keeps people from the outside. And if it's just for a month, then that's fine. But what's happened to a lot of people is they get into a retreat situation or a high demand spiritual community, and they are encouraged to stay within it and to stay isolated. And so what happens then is when thinking is regulated, there isn't anyone there who thinks differently. So there isn't any way for Sally to get some kind of reality check for someone else. In fact, Sally may be encouraged to cut ties with her friends, cut ties with her family, because the guru or the leader is infallible. When the guru or the leader is infallible, then Sally may be encouraged to run all of her life decisions past that person. Not her parents, not her friends, but the guru or the leader, because he, and it usually is a he, although not always, is infallible. The doctrine that is being promoted is the truth, and it's the only truth. Often, some feelings are evil. This is the thing that I find in working with survivors who have come out of these cults and are struggling, but who have survived enough to actually be interested in and willing to engage in a lawsuit, is that there is this sense that being angry, feelings of that negative feelings, for example, are evil. And that is something that is very difficult to overcome. Some thoughts are good. Generally, those thoughts are the thoughts that are kind of happy thoughts. In one of my cases, a woman who was very high up in the leadership of this organization reported to the board of directors that one of the other members of the board of directors was actually sexually assaulting people. And they said to her, your thoughts are too negative. You need to meditate on more positive thoughts. Of course, many of you or some of you may have been in those kinds of situations. They're very difficult for those of us outside of those worlds to recognize, but I see that all the time. A negative thought has to be turned to a positive thought. And so therefore, we can't deal with any of the issues that arise. There's a fear of the outside world that's generated. You need to stay inside this world. You will be destroyed if you go outside of this world, and people become fearful of that. There's a loss of salvation. There's a lot of talk of what happens to you if you get disconnected from your guru or from the community, and none of it is good. This is a very common one, which we often call gaslighting, which is you didn't think what you thought you thought. Right? So this is the no, you thought. This is in, I think, almost all of my cases. You thought that you were sexually assaulted, but actually that isn't true. I was just working on your bad karma, your enlightenment, or any one of a number of other, what I would call, which I have up there, fraudulent statements, fraudulent promises. There's a lot of sleep and food deprivation in some of these organizations, which, of course, as we are worn down physically, we become worn down mentally as well. Rigid rules, group identity. So not all of them, but many of them, people need to look the same. People need to shave their heads. People need to wear robes. Sometimes the robes are colored in order to delineate where you are in the organization. These are just some of the ways that these groups engage in fraud and in coercion. And that fraud and coercion often manifests in sexual assault. So it's no secret that this is, generally speaking, based on abuse of power. And when people are completely under another person or person's power, then this is often the result. So that is a little bit about what has happened to Sally. So I'm going to put my glasses on here and I'm going to look, because I see that I have at least one question in the chat box. Let's see. What do you think about the ways in which the justice system has disenfranchised survivors when we see justice through the legal system and the legal system gives us a slap on the wrist? Well, I think that you're absolutely right. And I want to talk a little bit about that and about my experience of that. But yes, I do think particularly, well, let me just say that the criminal justice system, and I have a slide, it will come up here in a moment, the door is closed. So we already fail survivors of rape in any circumstance, not just in high demand cults and spiritual organizations. We already fail those people. We fail them even worse when they are in religious organizations. And to your point, where the legal system gives a slap on the wrist, yes, absolutely. I would say, and I have this in my, if I look over here, it's because I have a big piece of white paper on my wall that lists every single one of my cases. And if I look over there, I can tell you a number of them in which the survivor has tried to go to the police and been told that there's nothing that they can do about it because of the First Amendment, which in the United States is the protection, again, the ability to practice your own religion with freedom. It has been way over interpreted to mean that a religious organization can do anything they want. That is not true, but it is certainly something that is promulgated. Thank you for that question. We're going to talk more about that. Have you prepared model laws that can be introduced into different legislative circumstances? The truth is, I have not myself, but I support a variety of different laws. One of them is that we need longer statutes of limitations, if not no statutes of limitations on sexual assault altogether. We've seen a lengthening of statutes of limitations for children under the theory that children, and it's true that children are not able to name the experience, that it takes them time to process it. My own experience working with clients and my own personal belief is that adults also need time beyond the time that is currently given in sexual assault laws for processing. And particularly when we are talking about a trusted spiritual advisor and a trusted spiritual community that has betrayed them. I think that even lengthens the process.
There's one more question that was sent to me privately. If you're finished answering about that, I don't want to.
Please go, Janice.
Okay. When this person was 14, they were sexually assaulted by a youth minister in one of the cults they were in. A call was made to the local police about it, not by this person, by someone else. And this person was told that detectives came to speak with the church multiple times. They never talked to this person, but this person found out about it because they were punished for it. Instead of punishing the minister, he was ordained and given a new church. This person is now an adult, and they've thought about moving forward with a legal case multiple times. Would PA police have been required to keep a record of coming to talk to the church and the person's parents? Could I call and ask for them?
Here, let me say, first of all, thank you for writing that in, because it is a perfect example of how we look at the level of betrayals that has happened in this one situation. Betrayed by the religious organization, betrayed by the justice system, that is the police, betrayed then by the church, betrayed in that the person who was responsible was then promoted to another situation. So here's what I would say to you. I would definitely call the police. I don't know how long in Pennsylvania that they have to keep records, depend on the year that it happened. I think that Janice will put perhaps my email address somewhere, Janice?
Yeah, we'll make sure that gets out.
So listen, email me, call them. And if you have problems getting it, email me and let's talk. I'll look up what the statute of limitations is. I'm going to talk about that as well. So thank you for putting that in there. Okay, keep your questions coming. It's very, very helpful, I know, for everyone to see the examples of exactly what we're talking about. So the question here is, Sally's been at this ashram. She's been told that she should not go back to the outside world. The outside world is dangerous. The guru is infallible. She's going to stay there. And then ultimately, as happens in all of the cases that I have, of course, there is a sexual assault. And so the question is there liability? Is there any tool that the law gives us in the United States? Primarily, I'm talking about, although I do have cases in Canada as well. Is there any tool for going after the perpetrator and getting any sense of accountability or justice? And also from the organization. So let's look at that and see. Now, to several of the very helpful comments and questions in the chat box. I believe that the door of the criminal law system is closed. In my experience, I don't have any clients who have so far been successful in taking the criminal law as a route to accountability and justice. Why is that? Because there are many obstacles. So you've already heard the obstacle that was put in the chat, which is that the police come out. It's impossible for me to understand how anybody could call an investigation that doesn't include talking to the person who was assaulted. I mean, that's just ridiculous, but it happens all the time. So what are the obstacles? The obstacles are, step one, are the police. Okay, so they came out in this case. They didn't talk to the person who was assaulted. Apparently, they didn't care enough to do that. I'm not sure why that happened, but that's the first step. And one of my clients said that she was one of these fortunate people who was within the statute of limitations in the state of Oregon. And she went to the police. And the police said, there's nothing we can do about it. It's a religion. Well, that's just ridiculous. So there's ignorance. There's, I don't know what the reasons are. There's biases, beliefs, all of these things are problems. The second thing is that if you get the police to do an investigation, then what happens is that they do that and then they send it to the district attorney. So the district attorney works not for a survivor. The district attorney works for the society, works for the state. They do what is best I'm sure in their judgment and within the resources that they have, but it's important to understand that they do not work for the survivor. They are not survivor-centered. They are not trauma-informed necessarily. And so the police go to the DA. The DA may have to go to a grand jury. A grand jury has to bring charges. If the grand jury brings charges, so each of these is like, I think of it as, those people in a track meet that run down the field and then they have to jump over a hurdle.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do. You have to jump over and then you have to run again and then you jump over. It's exhausting to me. In any case, if they go to trial, then the survivor has to testify. That's if they don't plead out because there isn't enough evidence or the district attorney doesn't feel that he can get or she can get a conviction. The survivor has to testify. Already a traumatizing and re-traumatizing experience. And then it goes to a jury. If a jury finds that the person is guilty, remember that the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. And when we're talking about sexual assault, we are not talking about a crime that happens in front of a lot of other people, generally speaking. So when we go to a jury, after that, if you win, the judge sentences the perpetrator. And for those of you who are in the United States and you follow any of this kind of thing, I will just say that you may remember the case of the Stanford swimmer, a young man who raped a young woman who was unconscious. He was doing it in an alleyway where two men on bicycles went past and saw him. Now, already you can see that there's much more evidence there than any other kind of sexual assault, normal sexual assault case. So they go to the police, she goes to the police, they go to the DA, they go to the grand jury, they bring charges, they go to trial, she testifies, it goes to a jury, and the jury finds him guilty. The judge says at the sentencing, I'm going to give him probation because I don't want to ruin his life.
Oh.
That is why I say that the door to the criminal justice system is closed. Because I don't know my own self how you survive not only being raped, but then being betrayed by the system. But that young woman has written a book about it. And so I haven't read it, but I think it would be interesting to find out how she did survive all of that. But that's what happens. Now, we don't usually think of this, but it's not, there are like two pathways in the justice system. One is the criminal pathway that I just told you about, and the other one is a civil pathway. So the civil pathway is different in this way. And some of the ways are, the kinds of things that we've talked about as problems in the criminal justice system. In the civil system, you have your own lawyer. So I have 30 clients. I am their lawyer. I do not settle a case like a DA might do unless that person wants to settle. I take my instructions from my clients. That's my ethical obligation. So civil law right there feels very different, I think, than the criminal side. The other thing in the civil justice system is that we can bring in the criminal justice system, we can only bring a claim against the perpetrator. Because the ultimate end of the criminal justice system is jail. And so it's just that individual. And a lot of clients, and I think that you could see this from some of the chats there, have also been betrayed by the organizations that they were in, and they would like to see some accountability for that as well. And in the civil justice system, you are allowed to sue, and we do, the perpetrator for assault and other things as well, sometimes, the organization often for negligence, which means that they had a duty, they were aware of a problem, and they failed to act. That's the kind of simple thing about negligence. So negligence is a claim that we often bring. Now, the other thing about a civil claim is that the standard is not beyond a reasonable doubt because nobody's going to jail. So the standard is more likely than not, which is a much lower standard to prove at trial, which turns out to be at trial, what we're really arguing over is money. There are other things that people ask for. They ask for an apology. They ask for an acknowledgement that the organization was wrong, that they were harmed. All of those things are possible in the civil system. But the primary thing that we are working for is money. Now, a lot of people will say to me, I don't want to do this for the money. And I understand that. But each and every person who has been harmed has also been financially harmed. So, for example, when you are assaulted by a trusted spiritual advisor, and then you are shunned by the organization that you reported to, if you take the example that I used, the hypothetical example that I used earlier, what I would say is that you have a lot of trauma. You have perhaps PTSD. You may have generalized trauma. It may have set you back from an educational program. You may not have been able to pursue the career that you wished to pursue before you got involved. You may have spent, as many of my clients have done, 15 or 20 or more years working for nothing at an ashram and have nothing at the end of it. And so it feels in our society like, well, you're a gold digger, or whatever people say. But what I have to say, oh, look, I get balloons, Janice. That's how I know that I'm starting to get angry, I think, is when the balloons go up and I start using my hands. What I have to say is that people who have been harmed in this way deserve money for reparations and for making their lives as whole as they can make them again. And that money is the currency of the civil justice system. I see a question. I'm going to answer it right now. Can you bring both criminal and civil charges against the perpetrator simultaneously? You can. You can. So here's what I would say. Not always simultaneously, but you can use both avenues. And so, ideally, in my view, I'd like to see some of the people who have harmed my clients lose all of their money and then go to jail. But, that's just me, Janice. If I raise my hands again, I may get balloons and confetti over that statement as well. So in the civil law system, we can bring charges against the perpetrator, against the organization. And I've given you some of those obstacles, which are right here. Maybe I didn't give you those obstacles. Yes, here. Statutes of limitations. So when someone asked about model legislation, I would say that, for example, in Canada, there are no statutes of limitations anymore. Very recently, I think since 2019, 2020, there should be no statutes of limitations in the United States for either child sexual assault or adult sexual assault, because what we know for a certainty from brain scientists is that it takes a long time to process this kind of trauma. And the statutes of limitations, which are sometimes as short as 2 or 3 years, are not long enough. They are simply not long enough. Another obstacle, sometimes nobody has any money. Sometimes assets have been hidden or assets are not there. And if there are no assets, then the civil system is not useful, because that's the ultimate, kind of the goal, is, so to speak. And the third one is about consent. And so this is a problem in both the civil and the criminal justice system, in that a lot of what happens, if you think back to Sally and the hypothetical example that I gave, a lot of what happened to Sally was coercion, was done under coercion, was done under fraud. And yet it's the kind of, if any of you followed the E. Jean Carroll trial against Donald Trump, his defense lawyer made a very big issue out of the fact that she did not scream. And I think what we know is that when we're trying to prove rape or sexual assault, we are likely to encounter a defense that says she did not fight back. So it was with great happiness that I saw that at least one jury was willing to accept that sexual assault can take place without screaming. Because when we're talking about cults, when we're talking about high demand religious groups, then we are talking about things that could look like they were consent. In fact, my client in Oregon, who does have a criminal case on hold while they're waiting to see how the civil case goes, was told by the police that there was nothing that they could do because she consented. And so that it is still a problem. We need what we need is more understanding in the criminal justice system and the civil justice system about consent. And I will give you an example. There are 13 states and the District of Columbia in the United States in which consent is not a defense for the perpetrator. We need 50 states in the United States and the District of Columbia to have those kinds of laws. And what they say is that the way, and they're different in every state because every state's law is different as to sexual assault, but most of them have something which says that you cannot raise consent as a defense if you were a teacher. If the assault was between a teacher and a student, between a pastor and a parishioner. And I would say that we might be able to expand those definitions to some of these high demand cults and religions, to be able to say that when there is this imbalance of power, because that's what it is, that there can be no issue of consent as a defense for the perpetrator or the organization. And I would point to those of you who work in any kind of workplace where they do sexual harassment training. You will know that a manager should not be sexually harassing or making sexual advances to their employees because of the balance of power, right? Because that manager has power over that employee. I would say that we are at a sad place in the status of the law in the United States when corporate America is doing a better job at regulating sexual assault than religious America. But that is exactly where we are. We need laws that say, when you are in this power position, you have power over me, consent is not a defense. We can make all kinds of arguments as lawyers about why why consent was not present, but it makes things harder. It makes things harder, and sometimes it makes them impossible. So On the front of the statutes of limitations, and here's some good news, and more along the lines of what we need in terms of legislation in other states, is that the statute of limitations period in New York has had what they're calling open windows or revival statutes. And those statutes revive old claims. So New York and California have been the primary states that have done this. They have had two open windows, both of them. New York had an open window for children who were assaulted before the age of 18. That closed in 2018 or 2019. New York right now, until the 24th of November, has an open window for adults who were sexually assaulted over the age of 18 in the state of New York. That window will close on the 24th of November this year. Very close to a month from now. I should know because I have 14 plaintiffs that I'm bringing charges for in the state of New York. These windows may open again, and other states may open windows. And so, in the absence of legislation that abolishes, that just does away with the statutes of limitations, we need states to open windows, revival windows, for people who have been assaulted in the past. I have a woman who was assaulted when I asked her in an intake interview, I always ask, because this is important for the statutes of limitations, what year did this happen? And sometimes when there are these old claims, they don't remember. People don't remember. Of course they don't. And they have to go back and they have to try to peg it to some other memory. But I asked this woman, do you remember what year you were assaulted? She said, I remember the day I was assaulted. It was the day that Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. So for those of you who are too young to remember that, it was 1969. And so that window has given her the opportunity to have processed what happened to her and to come forward and try to bring suit. So changes to the limitation periods is one of the things that we need to see more of. The other thing, and then I will stop and I will take the remainder of the questions, is that because we have so few tools, we have to be very creative about the tools that are out there under the law. And so we are bringing cases under the federal and some state sex trafficking acts. Now, I put there on there, thank you, Harvey Weinstein. What I really mean to say is thank you for the lawyers who represented the women who sued Harvey Weinstein, because they brought their claims in the state of New York under the federal U.S. Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And when I tell you what you have to prove, you will see that it is very applicable to high demand cultic spiritual groups. It goes like this. If you were recruited or enticed, right there, my antenna go up about cults and high demand spiritual groups, because they do recruit and entice. And if they recruit or entice a person, knowing that they are going to use fraud or coercion, and another word about fraud, but put fraud aside for now, let's just focus on coercion. If they, by coercion, you engage in what is called a commercial sex act. It really isn't commercial. It is a sex act for anything of value. And often the thing of value is something like you'll get to be within the inner circle of the organization, or you'll get to be closer to the guru. And when those things are present, the Trafficking Act has two things that are particularly helpful in addition to those things that I have there. One of them is that it is a 10-year statute of limitations. And for children, the statute of limitations has been eliminated if you still had a viable claim on the 21st of October of last year. And so that if that was the case, if you were within your 10 years, then your statute of limitation does not expire. For adults, it has not been eliminated. Another opportunity for legislative work and advocacy. On the issue of fraud, it goes to what I mentioned before about the First Amendment. The courts are not allowed. So a lot of my clients have that kind of fraud that I mentioned before, which is that you will be enlightened. This is a spiritual practice. But fraud is difficult for the U.S. courts to look into because of the First Amendment. And so when it is raised as a defense, we could certainly lose. So we're focused very much on coercion, which, by the way, luckily, we see a lot of in high demand groups, that there almost always coercion there that can be pled under the Trafficking Act. So I am going to go now to the rest of our questions. All right. Sexual assault has been called soul murder, so unlimited time to report is reasonable. I agree completely. Sexual assault is terrible under any circumstance. But when it is in a community with a trusted spiritual advisor, I think calling it soul murder, makes a lot of sense. And maybe someday, with all of the light that all of you are shining on this, maybe we will see that as a cause of action in the United States. We certainly need it. They recently updated the statute of limitations in Pennsylvania to age 52, if I'm not mistaken. That may absolutely be true. We're seeing a lot of states do a variety of things. Sometimes it's only for children. Sometimes it includes adults. But yes, you should look in the state where you were assaulted to see what's happening. Is the statute of limitations not the amount of time post-crime? I was not aware of it being age-related. It does depend. For example, in the current situation in New York, if you were assaulted before the age of 18, you do not now have an open statute of limitations unless you fit into what the current statutory scheme is, which I think is 55. So that might work for you. It's like for those of you who've had to take any kind of exam, like the GREs or the, whatever they call the exams to get into college, it's like a giant math question. You have to know where you were assaulted, that's the state, what year it was that you were assaulted, how old you were at that time, and then we look at the state where the assaults happened. Yes, if you can look at the information from the Pennsylvania Victims Advocacy website. Wonderful. And it's posted there for you. So thank you for that. Great. The system itself was also, the community showed up in droves to support the criminals. I know it. And you know what? The only thing that I can say that about the civil justice system is that you have a team of lawyers. I have 4 lawyers on my team, including with me, and then some other lawyers as well. And what we see ourselves as being is kind of standing in front of the survivor so that never has to happen. So that their lawyer deals with us and the survivor never has to deal with this kind of betrayal of the community that they were in. Can you bring a civil suit against local law enforcement for negligence in investigating crimes against children? I don't know. But what I will say is, what I know is that there is a certain amount of immunity from prosecution in the civil justice system for the police. But what I would say is, I'm looking at a case right now in which one of the issues is a civil suit against city, a municipality, and law enforcement. So I would say if you email me, I will keep you updated on how that goes. Why do attorneys tell me it's impossible to sue the Amish church? It could be for a number of reasons. If they're civil attorneys, and it sounds like they are, it's not that it's impossible to sue them. It may be impossible in your case. It may be because you're outside of the statute of limitations. It may be, it's not a barrier, by the way. I have a number of cases in which the perpetrator is actually dead. And so we're suing the organization alone. The organization may not have assets. It may have been too long ago, depending on the state that you are in. It's not impossible to sue a church. Okay, so let's all be clear about that. It is absolutely possible to sue a church, as we know by looking at the number of cases against the Catholic Church. If there's one thing that we've learned, it's that it is possible to bring civil suits against religions. In this case, it sounds like they're telling you it's impossible because of the facts of this case, which are often limited by the statutes of limitations and whether there are assets available. There should be no statute of limitations for sexual assault. Can I say amen, Janice, without invoking any religious belief whatsoever? I would like to do that. And if I raised my hand, I would get confetti and balloons, I would do that too. Yes. Thank you. So someone has put in, thank you for this, fawn. Not everyone fights. That's another thing that we know from brain science, isn't it? That there is fight, there is flight, there is fawn, and there is a fourth one. So if you know what it is,
Freeze.
Thank you. Of course. Really, can we not all understand that? It just doesn't seem that hard to me. At the very least, people understand freeze. Everybody has been in a situation when something bizarre happened to them and they froze. Could we not understand that when you are sexually assaulted by someone that you thought was your spiritual advisor, that you might freeze? Absolutely. And we know that. This is not just people talking about it. We know that. Yes, I'm sorry for the word revival. Yes, absolutely. What if open window is another way that I usually talk with it? The law calls it a revival. What, if anything, can we do to help change the laws around these crimes? In your own state, reach out and contact legislators who have been sympathetic, perhaps, or who seem to you like they might be sympathetic, and ask them to look at the laws in California, in New York, ask them to look at Canada, ask them to at least open a window so that those of you who have been harmed would have an opportunity for accountability and for whatever limited justice that the system is able to deliver to you. At even an open window, you have to imagine that the insurance companies hate these windows, and they are big. They are rallying against them. But legislators who can understand sexual assault should also be able to understand that the windows in New York and California, that they can look at those laws and how they were structured, and that they have brought something extremely powerful to people. I just filed a claim, and I will tell you that one of my plaintiffs emailed me the next day, and she said this. She said, if nothing more happens, if this gets dismissed, I have told my story. And they've had to listen. So for the person who went to court and the people from the church showed up to support the criminal, that doesn't happen here. The criminal in this case, at least in the civil justice system, is being made to get a lawyer, to pay attention, and to have to fight for his life. And to me, that is some level of accountability, and for her as well, no matter what happens. Great. I'm glad that you found that useful about the civil versus the criminal system. Is it possible, to create a law that female officers must respond to rape victims? I don't know whether, I think a lot of very much more enlightened police departments have, here's what I would say. All of them, female and male, need to have a particular mindset, right? They need to be survivor centered. They need to be trauma oriented. They need to understand the law. I would be happy for anybody, male or female, who understood the law and had some empathy and some compassion and some knowledge to be dealing with rape victims. But yes, I think that women have more sensitivity to it than men. Whether it's discriminatory or not, I don't know. I think the best option would be to give victims a choice. Yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to give victims, survivors, whatever we want to call those people who've come out of these situations and survived and gone on to live their lives, whatever that is. I think we need to give them a great deal more choice. And I think we need to give them a great deal more options under the justice system. So I am going to stop and ask for any of you who have additional questions, because I think that I must be close to my time. Am I close to my time, Janice?
You have 2 minutes left.
I have 2 minutes. I have an internal timer on this.
I did ask a question. I wonder if you could answer it. Can unsolicited penis photos be considered breaking a law because it feels violating to receive those?
Yes, and whether it breaks the law or not depends on the state that it is in. So if you Google revenge porn and some of those kinds of, phrases, you may find whether that is illegal in your states. But not too long ago, maybe just 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago, I saw an article in either the New Yorker or the New York Times, a big media outlet that was talking about this very issue. And yes, it is violating. And yes, when people share these photos, it is disgraceful that we don't have a federal law. And if you want to advocate for that, I would be looking at those legislators who have supported, for example, Durbin. I think Senator Durbin from Illinois was a sponsor for eliminating the statute of limitations on children under the Federal Human Trafficking Act. Call his office. Ask for a U.S. law on this kind of action, because we have these new tools now that people have. Perpetrators have new tools, nude photos, sharing photos, sending you nude pictures. It just really makes you wonder what people are thinking. But
yes,
maybe that's just me, but there may be in your state, So
Thank you. Thank you. This has been such an informative talk, and I've really appreciated you taking the questions as they came in. Thank you to everyone who submitted their questions and comments. I'm so thankful that you came and spoke to us today at court. Thank you. It's a different type of court than you're used to.
that's true. I hadn't thought of that, Janice. Thank you. I'm not usually at court at this time on Sunday night, so it's all good.
That's right. And in the chat here, we do have your email. Would you just say it out loud for people?
Yes, I will be happy to. It is C Murchison, and that is MERCHASIN, like Nancy, at mcolaw.com. Happy to answer your questions. I want to second Janice's thanks to you all for your questions. They're just so helpful for everyone is here. For those of you who shared your experiences, survivors of this kind of trauma are the strongest people that I encounter. So
thank you. Yes. And folks, if you can send me a note if you didn't quite get that email, and I'll be happy to pass it along to you. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're coming back for our final speaker of Court 2023. Dr. Daryl Ray is going to be speaking to us about religious trauma and our brain. Please take this opportunity to visit the exhibit hall and take a look at all the exhibits there. Thanks again, Carol.
thank you. Thank you all.